We're going to go ahead and get started. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of things about this church that make me happy, but the amount of ball players in this room right now is making me really happy. Church softball team about to be really good in about 2 years. I'm excited about it. All right, if you have a Bible, you can open it to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to be continuing in our series on the Sermon on the Mount, and if you're not familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, it is the most kind of central, important teaching that Jesus gave. And, you know, obviously everything for us is about Jesus and what he taught. And so this is pretty much the most central thing that we can be looking at in terms of New Testament teaching. And so I don't know if somebody in the back could pull that door shut. Oh, dude, on cue. So Matthew chapter 5, if you're not familiar with the Bible, the big numbers are the chapters. Matthew is the first book in the New Testament. And if you didn't know this, and I know some people didn't know this, there is like a table of contents at the beginning of your Bible. So whatever Bible you got, you could probably find the page number for the Matthew somewhere right in the beginning, right after the cover of your Bible. So Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount is there in Matthew 5 through 7. And today we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to look at verses 33 to 37. We're going to just begin by, I'm just going to read it with you. So I'm going to invite you to look on the screen. This will be the same translation I'm going to have. And if you want to, you can read it aloud with me, but nobody's forcing you to. But let's read it together if you're able, and then we will dive in together. Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair black or white. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. This is the word of the Lord. So this text is giving us the fourth out of 6 illustrations that Jesus used to depict what we might call a righteousness that exceeds those of the Pharisees, which is what he said we needed in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so today what we're going to see is that Jesus is speaking about, in this teaching, truthfulness and really the integrity of our speech, right? And so I don't think I need to do a lot of work to convince you that this is a relevant topic for us today. It's blatantly relevant for us. Lies are like the air that we breathe. We are in an age of misinformation and disinformation and just wrong information. And so the way that we think about the truth and how our speech reflects that is incredibly important for us. I was thinking this week about like an example of this, and of course there is like a cornucopia of examples I could give. But the most recent impactful one for me was the shooting that we had at Lansdowne High School. I was out on a ball field, and I just knew that within 5 minutes on a Facebook group that is tied to our zip code, it was just going to be like wildfire misinformation happening about what happened and who did it and where are they and the cops got them. And that's just the world we live in now. Any information, true or not, just goes fast, and it takes forever to backtrack and go, wait a minute, this piece was false, this piece was true, this was a mistake which led to this lie and this. And so this talk today about that Jesus gives about our speech and about truthfulness is really, really incredibly important for us. So in verse 33, Jesus, again, this is a pattern for him in the Sermon on the Mount here. He is going to re-summarize the traditional old teaching on taking oaths and vows here. Look at verse 33 of Matthew chapter 5. He says, again. So he's saying again because he's doing this over and over. This is one of the 6 times he's going to say, you've heard that it was said, but now I'm going to tell you. So here you go, verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. So from this text, and really the rest of the Old Testament, I want you to understand 2 things about swearing vows and oaths. Now, just for the sake of clarity today, when I say the word swearing today, I don't mean cussing. Okay, I mean like swearing an oath, like promising. All right? So first, vows were actually normal and even encouraged in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 10:20 says this, You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and hold fast to him, and by his name you shall swear. So, not only were people encouraged to make vows and make oaths, but they actually were encouraged here in Deuteronomy to do that in God's name. Okay? Secondly, what was discouraged was making a vow, swearing to do something, and then not doing it. That's what was discouraged in the Old Testament. Moses repeatedly says things like this from Leviticus 19. You shall not swear by my name falsely and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Numbers 30. If a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Deuteronomy 23, if you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you. So this is the summary of it, right? Vows are assumed, maybe even encouraged, but once they're made, they are never to be broken. Now, tie this back to the conversation we had last week about divorce, right? That's a covenant vow you're making at your wedding. And so these are all connected together. And so the Bible taught that vows and oaths were incredibly serious. They're not just something to just throw out, right? The issue was that in Jesus' time, the traditional sort of biblical teaching had come under the perversion of the human heart. Shocker, right? Like we don't do that now. I can't tell you how many times I hear somebody say, I swear to God, man, right? And then they say something that they know they're not going to do. That's just like normal for us. Somewhere along the line in Jesus' time, there were some rabbis, not all of them, but some of the rabbis in the kind of rabbi-teacher sort of culture, they began to teach that an oath was actually not binding if it didn't include God's name or didn't imply God. So if you swore by like your own name, or you swore by someone else's life, or the life of like the king, like the person named Abner did in 1 Samuel, or if you swear by that tree, like if you swear by an object, but if you don't mention to or allude the name of God, then you're kind of not bound, right? We love loopholes, don't we? That's like, oh, we love it. And so the Mishnah, which is like the written teachings of the rabbis, it actually devotes a whole section called Oaths to a really elaborate discussion of when oaths are binding and when they're not binding, okay? The swearing of oaths, I mean, I'm sure it probably sounds a lot like what lawyers do now. Well, were they under duress when they signed the swearing of oaths had basically sort of degenerated into what it's always degenerated into, which is a system of loopholes as to when you could lie and when you can't. And so there was this ongoing epidemic of frivolous swearing. Last night, my daughter and I had a little fun. I taught her what quid pro quo means in the like diner area of Sam's Club. She said, "Well, Dad, I got you a refill." And I said, "Well, I didn't say if you get me a refill, I'll buy you an icy. There was no quid pro quo, okay? So thank you for the refill, but we didn't make a deal." So that's kind of, poor Journey, I know. That's kind of normal. She gets a lot of ices. That's kind of how it is I know that's a joke, but like that's what goes on. And this is what was happening then. It's degenerated into it's kind of like a net of loopholes, and you would figure out, well, when am I actually able to skirt around what I said I would do? And so oaths are just continually mingled into their speech. It's just like constantly they're all this sort of lofty sounding language that basically had become meaningless. I swear by my life. I swear by my beard, right? That's why he mentions hair. May I never see the comfort of my homeland Israel unless I blah, blah, blah. Like this is just how people had begun to talk. And so there's this inevitable sort of trivialization of everyday language and integrity. You know, the best example I could think of trivializing a word is that every storm we see is what? Catastrophic, right? Every storm is catastrophic. So that word means nothing now. And this is what's happening here with their words. It had become common practice to convince another person that you were telling the truth while you were lying through your teeth by bringing up some like famous person or some famous place or something into reference. And so there was this subtle deception that was there all the time. And so as an example, there was a rabbi that taught if you swore by Jerusalem, which Jesus mentioned, I don't know if you remember that, but if you swore by Jerusalem, you're not actually bound to do it. It's a loophole. But if you swear towards Jerusalem, then it's binding. Okay? Because somehow that implied the divine name. Sounds crazy, and that was, but this seems pretty familiar to the way that we talk and do deals and contracts. So this is the way that I would summarize this teaching. Again, we love loopholes. All of us, and for sure, some of us more than others. Some of us are more prone to this sin than others. But all of us, to some degree or another, will look for some kind of loophole that will get us out of doing something that we said we would do or not doing something that we shouldn't do. That's basically the same thing that's happening here. That's the heart underneath all of this sort of system of swearing. Now, look at how Jesus responds to this, really this foolishness, starting in verse 34. But I say to you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. So, Jesus rules out making vows using references to other people or to objects as like collateral or backup. Why does he do this? Well, here's the reason that Jesus sort of implies and gives in the text. God is actually behind everything. He's the creator of all that is, seen and unseen. That's what the creed says. And so the entire creation is God's, and so you can't refer to a part of God's creation without ultimately referring to him. Matthew 23 is another example. Jesus says that all such oath-taking, vowing, and swearing is wrong. It comes from evil, he says. But that's not all he says. He began by saying, but I say to you, don't take an oath at all. So the end of verse 34 through the end of verse 36 is like the parentheses of information in regards to this kind of evasive way of like looking for loopholes and swearing oaths, but knowing you're not really going to do it. Jesus concludes with verse 37, which is really, really important. He says, let what you say simply be yes or no. I always heard it as, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more than this comes from evil. What is he getting at here? He's getting at the darkness of our human hearts, right? You'll see a similar statement in James chapter 5. Jesus' opening and closing teachings taken together really state this sort of superseding reality. He says, but I say to you, don't take an oath at all. Let what you say simply be yes or no. He's saying, make your words mean what they mean. Anything more than this comes from evil. So Jesus is saying that the radically righteous types of men and women, the kind of people for whom the kingdom of heaven is home, don't need to swear that they're telling the truth, and in fact should refrain from doing that because it leads to the temptation of, hey, let me just tell you the truth right now, right? You ever do that in conversation? Well, you know what? Let me just tell you the truth. Like everything I said before that was probably half a lie. Right? Again, Jesus here is surpassing and superseding the requirements of the law. The radically righteous people, the men and women of the kingdom of heaven, don't need oaths because they just tell the truth and their words just mean what they mean. And here is what's true, and we all know it. We don't like to say it, but we all know this is the case. The only reason we participate in oath-taking and swearing comes from the reality that we are all liars. We tell lies, and we know we tell lies, and we make mistakes, right? When I do premarital counseling with couples, one of the conversations I have with them is, hey, if you're tempted to get into a prenuptial agreement, red flags. That is you setting yourself up to not keep the covenant you're going to make. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Right now, obviously, Jesus isn't condemning all covenants. Like, there's space for that. He knows we live in a culture where you might get called to court. I did recently as a juror, right? And you might have to swear an oath. He's not saying, like, you have to refuse that. He's just saying you shouldn't need oaths to be part of your conversations to tell the truth. There's a theologian named Helmut Thielicke who puts it like this. Maybe it's Thielicke. I don't remember. He says this, whenever I utter the formula, I swear by God, I am really saying, Now I'm going to mark off an area of absolute truth and put walls around it to cut it off from the muddy floods of untruthfulness and irresponsibility that ordinarily overruns my speech. In fact, I'm saying even more than this. I'm saying that people are expecting me to lie from the start, and just because they're counting on my lying, I have to bring up these big guns of oaths and words of honor. Right? So he's saying if you have to say, well, hey, I'm going to tell you the truth now, you're like fencing off part of your speech, assuming the rest of it's false, that you're actually going to tell the truth. And so Jesus' call to us is to come away from this cheapening of language and words and instead give ourselves to radical truthfulness. So, what are the implications of Jesus' teaching for us here for our day-to-day lives? Are we never supposed to take oaths like any personal oaths? What about public oaths like what we might be asked to take in court? Well, there's some streams of the church who take an absolutist interpretation. They refuse to take an oath. They refuse to swear that something is true or not true in any time and in any place. And so some of those backgrounds, streams of the church, I say would have a little more of an extreme viewpoint that I don't necessarily agree with. But we have examples from Jesus, but also examples from Paul on how this can look in our day-to-day lives. Here's Paul in 2 Corinthians. But I call God to witness against me. It was to spare you that I refrained from coming again to Corinth. Right? So this is the equivalent of him saying, I swear to Almighty God. So he says then in Romans 1, for God is my witness. There's another one. Whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers. So obviously, Paul doesn't believe that he's like denying Jesus' teaching when he appeals to God as his witness under the pressure of defending his ministry. So there isn't a legalistic standpoint that I'm trying to take here. What can we draw about, deduction can we draw concerning the way we should speak? Well, here it is. Oath-taking might be permitted, but it's not the normative, encouraged way of speaking for Christians. Right? In civil life, when you're a citizen of another kingdom, which we are here, citizen of a country, like in the courtroom, it's permitted when you have to do so. You're not like sinning against God to swear on the Bible if you're like, a witness in a court case, right? On rare occasions where it might be necessary, like it was for Paul, to get your point across, it could be allowable. Obviously, we would say wedding vow is totally allowable, right? You're making a vow in front of God and other people. But in normal relationships, that kind of swearing and oath-taking is not part of our normal speech. It's just yes is yes and no means no. We don't need this language device. Our commitment to truthfulness should be all that we need. So, the call to us is a call to a life of profound truthfulness. The problem we have is we live in and participate in a radically deceptive world, a world that is deceitful down to its roots, right? Language has devolved to the extent that we don't even know what the other person is saying sometimes. We are so like cynical and jaded about language, we don't even realize when we're embellishing the truth. We all do it. Think about the last time you talked to someone about something you did wrong and how you just cushioned it a little bit, right? The reality is we live in a world where it's hard to tell the real truth. It's not easy to be a totally truthful person today, but it's necessary for the church and it's necessary for the good of our neighbors in the world. And I think that people in the world actually long for freedom from dishonesty. They are enslaved to dishonesty and misinformation, and I think people are actually looking for freedom from that. Deep down, I think that people would like to escape that show and they would long to be free from pretense, right? I remember I was in counseling for about 6 months when I was younger over some issues I had going on. And one of the things that was brought up was kind of like this insecurity that I was living with. That still rears its head, right? Like it doesn't just go away like that. And so I remember the counselor was saying to me, what if when you, and we were talking about this setting where I'm doing something like this, what if after you led worship or, preached or whatever, what if you didn't like go in the lobby and give everybody a report card to hand back to you? Meaning, like, what if you weren't enslaved to what everyone else thought about you, and so you lived your life in such a way where you had to kind of cover over your sin a little bit and not really tell the truth about everything because you wanted people to like you. And I remember he said that, and we went through some prayer, and that was a moment of somewhat being set free from that and me realizing, wow, I can actually love people more if I just am truthful. And that was a big moment, right? So, and I want you to hear me say this, those of you that are into this. Christian apologetics are really good and important. Being able to defend our faith and make good arguments for Christianity is not unimportant, but it is not more important than our integrity, right? So we can have all the right, and I'm about to go there, we can have all the right political stances and have terrible Christian character, and it doesn't matter. Christianity, being able to make good arguments for Christianity is not unimportant, but your integrity is more important. It is not more important than being a person who is the same person everywhere. Many people, I think, look to believers to display the kind of oneness in their personhood for which they actually long. And our integrity as followers of Jesus can actually make a huge difference in a dying world. Here is Helmut Tillich again, the theologian. He says, the avoidance of one small fib may be a stronger confession of faith than an entire Christian philosophy championed in lengthy, forceful discussion. When people know that you don't lie, your testimony will mean, in your relationship to them will mean way, way more than any skill you might have at debating them over an issue. Right? So truthfulness matters as much as any other pet peeve sin that you or I in the church might get so bent out of shape over. Right? So like for the last few weeks, we've covered like the big ones, the big sins, right? That we love to just hold over people's heads sometimes in the church. But what about little fibs? What about as a Christian not completely telling the truth in a transparent way? Are those just as big of a deal? Well, according to the Bible and according to Jesus, yes. Listen to what the Bible has to say in Colossians. This is Colossians 3. Put to death, therefore, okay, so we covered that, right? Mortifying your sin. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. Now listen to the list. Sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming, right? And some of us church folks are like, yeah, all that bad stuff out there. And then Paul says, in these you too once walked. Oh, man. Brought it back to us when you were living in them. But now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Right? And so those of us who are church folk are like, yeah, get those bad sinners. Yeah, get them. With all their bad talk and their wrath and their malice and their all that bad sexual immorality, get them, Lord. And then, here comes verse 9. And this is written to the church, to the Christians in Colossae. In verse 9, what does he say? Do not lie to one another. Seeing that, and you getting the reason why is so vital for this. Do not lie to one another, Christians, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. So I hope you just heard that. Apparently lying to one another is such a big deal, right? And what's the most common lie? I use this text all the time. What's the most common lie we like to tell each other in the church without even telling each other? I think the most common lie we try to participate in with one another in the church is the lie of trying to talk and act and look like we're more spiritually mature than what we actually are. And we lie to each other and go, oh yes, I don't struggle with that sin anymore, brother. Well, first of all, why are you saying brother? We don't talk like that, right? Like we do this pretense thing, and this is what he's getting at. That what's underneath the desire of you to go, well, let me tell you the truth, and like, let me swear. Jesus, throughout the Bible, is basically telling us, I'm not buying it. Quit lying. Just say what your words mean, and notice the connection. Lying there is rooted in the same exact thing as all those other quote-unquote super bad sins, right? Lying is rooted in your old self and its practices. What are the practices of the old self? All of those sins listed, including lying. So to lie, to play games with our words, is to walk in the old self that Jesus died for. I hope you see that connection. There is a direct connection between the way that you use words and truth and how much you are moving towards Jesus and his kingdom. Those are very connected. See, for Jesus, words are sacramental. Here's what I mean by that. A sacrament, we usually think of things like baptism and communion. A sacrament is essentially an outward sign of an inward reality. So what Jesus and I think the Bible is teaching us is that the way we think about and use words is sacramental because our words are outward signs of an inward reality. Jesus said in Matthew 12, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Right? So the reality is that an increasingly truthful spirit brings forth an increasingly truthful pattern of speech. Our words have an eternal weight and glory to them, and so this is why our words matter. But again, we have to understand the correct order of operations here. Jesus is not saying, force yourself to quit lying so you can be good with me. That's not what he says. He's inviting us to follow him so that as we follow him and as we hear his words, we become increasingly the kind of people for whom the truth feels like home. This takes intention, though, right? You don't just fall into holiness. We have to practice stopping ourselves, not just from outright lying, but also stop ourselves when we find ourselves fudging the truth just a little bit, right? Let me just make myself sound a little bit better than I actually am. Jesus doesn't mince word with his followers in Matthew, and I don't think he's mincing his words with us either. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you for your hard words. Thank you for exposing the reality that we like to use our words to make ourselves look more holy than we actually are. Thank you for the freedom in just being able to say yes or no and to walk with you. Lord, I just ask that as we go out this week and we speak and as we hear the deluge of just information and lies that just are part of our lives, that you would help us to sift through those, that as much as is up to us, we would be people of the truth. That if we hear something or see something that we're not sure if is actually true, that we wouldn't continue to spread it. Lord, that you would make us a people who our words just mean what they mean. We don't have to set them up with any other phrases. We don't have to use any other kind of language. Our yes means yes and our no means no. So Lord, we ask this in your name. Amen.